Welcome to the ROI Masterclass, the podcast where vision meets strategy and bold moves create measurable results. I'm Liat Siegel, interior designer and ROI strategist with 17 years of experience. I help businesses transform properties and ideas into high-performing assets. This show is specifically for real estate investors, hospitality operators, and boutique developers who aren't afraid to take risks, challenge the status quo, and demand a return on every decision they make. Each and every week, we talk with innovators and leaders across industries about the strategies and the insights and really all the unconventional thinking that turns potential into profit every single time. If you believe that smart design, decisive leadership, and strategic risk are the keys to real ROI, you're in the exact right place. Let's dive in. Today, we're joined by Mason of LivX Realty, a hands-on investor and property owner based in New Jersey with experience across multifamily, mixed use, retail, and hospitality. Clay specializes in acquiring distressed assets, executing value-add renovations, and maximizing cash flow in complex, regulated markets. This conversation is all about practical execution, systemization, and turning underperforming properties into profitable assets. Thank you so much for joining us, Clay. We had an awesome pre-show conversation where we got into all the nitty-gritties of construction and design and the not so nice aspects of real estate. Tell us about your journey, who you are, and perhaps about some of the challenges that have shaped the way that you approach real estate today.
As far as my entry into real estate, it probably started out with I should say, is my father, my stepfather. He was a developer, a landowner, a landlord. And later on in life, I discovered he was the rich dad, poor dad, because he was my stepdad. My dad was the poor dad and my stepfather was the rich dad. And I didn't realize until later on all of the things that he did in real estate in terms of managing properties, managing tenants, adding value. So that's where my journey began. But interestingly enough, I didn't realize that until later as I'm actually doing it. How did I do this? And I figured out, it was because of him. I watched him do that. So I was lucky to have that mentor, although I didn't see him as a mentor in the beginning.
What was it like learning from him? What was the biggest lesson that you took away?
He's the old generation, and old generations preserve everything, they save everything, and they do everything themselves. And that's what I learned as a landlord. We didn't have this property management thing where, somebody will just take care of it. It was, he would take care of it, or he have somebody work alongside taking care of those things. And he was always on. He was always on from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m., taking calls and doing it himself. And I see that a lot in me. However, I discovered that it is stressful because you're always on. When you have 50 units like he had, I think he had like 75 at one point, running all that himself as the small guy, that takes a toll on you. So I'm learning to be more efficient. I'm learning to allocate certain jobs, but not let it get to a point where it gets too expensive. Because in my role, I don't like to say I'm the small guy, but in a sense I am. I'm the small guy where it's not yet affordable for me to have a property manager dedicated to all of my portfolio, because I'll start losing money. That's where I am right now.
What was one of the things that you wouldn't like? Is that specific aspect something that you ideally don't want to repeat, or is there something specific, right? You talked about the good things, but is there some not good things that you would do differently, or that you do differently?
I have pride in my palaces, so I like to make them look sharp, give them more of an appeal. And he was more of use the same paint and paint over the wall outlets and such like that. And I just said, just a little bit of finesse, a little bit of love will make your places a little bit more valuable, but the people there will appreciate it more. But I felt that he's been through so many experiences. He's like your typical old landlord, like, why bother? Why bother fixing up? They're going to ruin it anyway. I'm going to put new paint on it. But then you get a different group of tenants over time. And when you do start making them look nice and they see you as the landlord appreciate your properties, they begin to appreciate it as well. I think when you get into the stage where you see the owner, the landlord not appreciating their own asset, then why the hell would the tenant? So I think I've managed very well keeping my tenants happy, showing them that I respond to their issues. And I think they appreciate that.
Do you think that that is the major reason for investing in a property versus not? Because there's definitely different schools of thought, especially for multifamily when it comes to B and C class properties. Why invest? right? Like why, in your own words, why would you spend more? I mean, you touched on that a little bit, but can you go into a little more detail?
Well, the B and C are probably the biggest opportunity where the small guy can enter. There's room for growth. There's risk. I mean, it's operational at that point, right? You're an operational investor. I see an opportunity. I see something distressed. And as me, I'm an operational person. I can get in there hands-on, get them back into order, as opposed to like just recently, a friend was looking at a $6.8 million property in Queens, turnkey, 2008, elevator, all rented out. To be honest, I can't afford that at a 3.5, 4 cap. That's for a different type of investor. That's for like a core investor that wants to take, $9 or $7 million worth of their money and put it in a preserved asset. I call it a nice bond. It's a bond where they're just moving assets. In these class, the BCs, is that's where there's cash flow to be made and there's upside. And that's where I fall in, is that operational type investor where I see upside. I can use maybe my blood, sweat, and tears and maybe capture some revenue and either hold on to it for a long period of time or create an exit strategy in 5 to 7 and sell it and reinvest.
Is that ideally where you want to stay, or are you wanting to get to that next level?
I totally would love to trade up. And I think it takes a lot of strategy because it does take a toll on you working it every day. I see some of the folks like Umberto Lopez in New York City who owns 100 buildings. And that takes a toll on you. Managing all that, you have to have a good system. What I like to do is buy something that is definitely turnkey, hands off, gives me enough cash flow to let me live a satisfying life. I don't need to fly in the Learjets or like that, but live a simple life, good cash flow. And that's sort of where I want to be. So yes, I think I'm going to have to trade up at some point. So I'm not doing all the hands-on.
What does it take for an investor to get to that next level? For any of our audience that wants to get to that next stage, how do they do that?
You need to have a lot of money. Like if you come from money, families do come from money and they should learn to use that money. And I'm sure they do. But if you have money and you want to invest in an asset, that's the way you start. For the small guy like me, you started out with nothing. You started off with 2-family and about another 2-family in Plainfield. I had to sacrifice going into neighborhoods that were more risk. And so that's where I started. I started in the riskier areas where I could perform, as opposed to, back in the days, I want to go to Summit right next to the train station. And I wanted to buy a 2-family. Well, back then it was $800,000, $900,000. There's no way in hell that I was going to be able to afford that. But go to Plainfield, 2-family, I bought it for $100,000. I was able to afford that. So I went through that, the hand-to-hand combat period and then built the wealth gradually. Used that, bought something else and traded up, if you will. So that's a good step. One thing they never say about this business too is there's something to be said about being hands-on. There's something to be said about going into a distressed property or any property and just seeing that's not going to cost $750 to do. That's probably a trip to Home Depot and it'll probably cost you $65, save your money. But some of these new investors, I think, get in there and they think, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to have a property manager take care of it. Well, that property manager is going to be like a mechanic. They're not going to fix your alternator. They're going to replace the whole alternator. So fixing and replacing is a whole different ballgame. So that can cost a lot of money. So what would cost me $75 is going to cost the new guy $750 to replace something, because I can see it doesn't need so much a new replacement or what have you.
I think that comes down to systems. I know we were speaking before about speed, and to achieve speed, it's through having systems in place and having, standard operating procedures. Do you think that can be learned so that it can be offloaded to somebody else? Or do you think an operator has to be hands-on in order to do that?
Trust is a big deal. If you have a portfolio and you want to know that somebody's looking at your properties as well as you are, and speed is definitely a lot of things. Speed plays very well when you're developing or renovating. You want to get it up and running and go and rent it out. So it's not like just a system, and a system includes knowing your tradesmen that you're going to work with, knowing the tradesmen you can guarantee they're going to be there, and of course paying them well. So definitely having a good system and an expeditious system is key.
Do you think that is enough to allow an operator to be more hands-off, or especially at the level where it's required them up until now to just be in the daily grind?
How I work my properties is I looked at them and I saw all of the safety components and the things that I need to address address quickly. So I would probably go in there, fix the doors, fix the outlets, new outlets, and make them not only safe, but look presentable. And once I got it to a comfortable place, then I hate to say it, but I just need a guy to walk my premises once a week, make sure there's no leak, make sure the toilet's not running, make sure all those simple things that a landlord looks at all the time. Because a running toilet can cost a lot of money if nobody cares. The tenant doesn't care, I don't care. So it's running. Next thing you know, you got a $400 water bill. So the lights getting loose, the fans getting loose. So those things get addressed when I go in, and then I have somebody kind of do a roundabout. Hey, just go in there, John or whoever I hire, and just every week he checks. I don't need anybody picking up my checks. We're brokers, so I don't need anybody finding me new tenants. Brokers won't like this, but back in the days, we used Craigslist and the newspaper. That's how we got our tenants. And sometimes I still do that because sometimes they don't want to pay $1,000 or a monthly payment to get into the apartment. And I'm willing to negotiate with those people. So I found really good tenants that last a long time.
Take us through the step-by-step process of finding a property to the time you rent it out. What is your typical process look like?
Well, anybody will tell you that first you got to look at the numbers and see if it's feasible. And then do you have a gut for it? Meaning hate to say this, but is it in an area that you're going to play in? So with me, I changed my tune a bit. There's some areas that because I'm operational and hands-on, I just don't want to go into some different areas that I'm not familiar with, nor do I have my team, right? I don't know the electrician there. I don't know and will my electrician go so far away? He may not. Back to my stepfather, he had this whole portfolio almost in this whole neighborhood. And I said, he's like Boss Hogg from Dukes of Hazzard. He owned like everything there. And it was so convenient because he knew all the plumbers, electricians, everyone. And he could just drive down and manage his properties. And it was such a cash flow. I really envy and appreciate some of these other folks that, have investments here and there and everywhere. But for me, it's hard to manage as an operational person. I want to manage close by. I guess what I would tell people is that with systems comes knowing tradesmen and tradesmen that you can trust. That's the first start. So when I analyze a property, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question about analyzing a property, but first comes down to the numbers. Do the numbers work? And then do you have the gut for the neighborhood that you're working in? And then can you manage the property once you know the numbers are right? And of course, it comes down to finances, right? Hence investment. I'm investing in this to make money. I'm hedging my bet against inflation. I'm doing better than the banks. Hopefully it's better than CD. And I'm not going to put all my money in the stocks. So real estate is the next best thing. So if you can manage well and hold on to it, I think you're going to be in a good place.
What kind of things do you invest in order to maximize that asset? In terms of when you get a property and you're doing a value add or repositioning?
I charm up the inside and the outside. When they first walk in, I try to make the door front look presentable, like I live here. And then every walk into that apartment, I make like it's the first present. So new style, good, nice paint, maybe an accent wall. Of course, we have to be considerate of the floors. I started using the vinyl flooring for two reasons. Number one, it's easy to install, it's cheaper. And also it could be scratch proof if you have pets or they want pets. I love pets. I have a Labrador, but I don't want people with pets in my apartments because it just adds chaos. Number one, noise. Number two, scratching, smelling, etc., etc. I know this is terrible to say, but I don't want it. I'm thinking that somebody's getting into an apartment and it's a starter place for them. So I sometimes, I don't want to say reject, but I try to fray from having pets because that can be damaging and cost me more money. The other thing is, of course, the bathroom, if you can make it more charming, and the lighting. Back in the days, we had the lights that go right over, but now recessed lighting is so cheap. You can just, cut a hole, run a wire into the sheetrock, and you can have nice recessed lighting in an hour and a half. So those are the types of things I typical things to make look nice.
Do you have any other amenities, even have you ever considered like a pet fee or anything else to kind of increase the rental rate?
I do. And why I'm different from some of these other folks is that if you're talking some of these luxury buildings, they can offer the gym and the pool and all that. We're talking, smaller 5-unit, 6-unit kind of dwellings that you've seen in some cities where you don't have the ability to do that. You have a low ceiling basement, you can't have a gym. Sometimes I'll offer laundry and such, but that can be chaotic as well. It can be an added expense. It could be more water if you're paying for the water. So that's a tough one. I've offered, this is going to sound funny, but offering the free Wi-Fi for the building. I've done that before. But I think generally in my case, because I can't add so many amenities, I try to keep the properties looking clean, let them know that I'm there, answer all their never questioned. So I'm more of a service to them. One little thing I do to my tenants, and this sounds corny, every spring and winter, I buy a tulip and I put it in front of their doors. And then poinsettias I bought in the wintertime, I put it in front of the doors. And I don't say anything like, oh, I got you this. I just put it there and then let them think. But every year I just do that, like an appreciation. Not for my commercial retail folks, but just for the tenant. And again, I'm a small guy. I don't have like 100,000 tenants, but I have a big group of them. But I shouldn't get personal, and I don't get personal with them. But what I do is, like, for instance, I have an old gentleman, he's 70, and he'll call me and, hey, how you doing? I give him my time, because he's been in there for 15 years. So he calls me and he just wants to have a conversation. They're the best. Lonely man, he's getting his pension or whatever he gets. He pays his rent, doesn't cause any problems. Most of the old folks don't cause any problems. So that's the sort of thing I do. They say, don't get close with your tenants. And I don't, but I try to at least treat them like people and not tenants.
Yeah, I love that. I think especially in the New York, New Jersey market, it's easy to kind of make it, and anyone who's lived here or has invested here understands that it can kind of feel a little cutthroat and cold. And I think that it's really says a lot about your character that you do that, and that you do care. And I think tenants can feel that. And I don't think that ROI is just money. ROI is also people, right? And the way that we treat them, the way that we communicate, that we interact, and that we create environments that people feel safe in and want to stay in, then that ripple effects to ROI.
It will. The only place that I'm going to counter that, and mind you, I recently got exposure to some of the big landlords in New York City and exposure to those folks. There's a whole different breed, by the way. I mean, New York is a different animal. And even with Jersey City, Hudson County that I work in now, we're selling a couple buildings there. The landlords probably need to have thicker skin, and they are a little cutthroat, not because of their personalities. Most of them can be sweethearts, but they get crushed by the regulation and rent control. So I don't have rent control. I renovate my property. I'll rent it out for $2,300 when it was $1,750 2 months ago, 1 month ago. I'll do that, and I have the pleasure to do that in my town. But if I was in Union City and the person moved out and I renovated this thing and I spent $8,000, now mind you, I spent $20,000 on the last renovation of a property, and I raised it up $500, $600. I'm getting my return. I would be a cold, cutthroat landlord if I had to pay $12,000 to $20,000 renovating my property, and they tell me, well, you can only raise it 3%. But I just spent $18,000 renovating and making it new for a new person. I want to rent it out for, I can get $2,500 for this. No, it's $1,500. It'll take me 18 years to get my return. That would make me a bitter landlord and a cold, not because I'm blaming the tenant, just because the system is crushing me. I want to make it nice and appealing. And that's something I got exposure to over the last 2 years in Union City. Rent control is a killer. I understand some of the mentality behind it, but from a landlord perspective, if you're a good landlord, I want to invest my properties like we just spoke about. I want to make them nice and pretty and happy and make it a good place. But if I'm not going to get a return, then I become charity. And I can't afford to be charity yet.
Right. It's a business at the end of the day. And, some people will say, oh, they just care about money. I'm like, well, it's a business. They're supposed to care about money. That's how they stay in business.
And remember, that's the funny thing about landlords is I'm an operational landlord, right? I'm not a core investor. I'm not buying the $6 million that's turnkey. I don't have that kind of cash. I'm the operational. I'm the ones getting there hands-on, looking to renovate. So every penny counts. I own this building and, oh, you're rich. You're not necessarily rich. You're getting cash flow, but you're trying to use it wisely, because most of these landlords you'll hear, especially on the Instagram with some of the guys I listen to, you can get set back pretty quick. One furnace goes out in the wintertime, that's $7,000. That's $8,000. And in the wintertime, the plumber's going to charge you more because it's the wintertime. So that can set you back. That's could be a year's worth of rentals. So it's not so glamorous. It's just a matter of juggling all of these things to keep the cash flow going. So I think tenants should look at it that way as well.
Do you think that investors should not get into rent-controlled properties? Would you recommend staying far, far away?
Well, the way I was describing B, C, and maybe even some D class properties in rent-controlled areas is that it's a bond with a headache. That's a great statement. It's a bond with a headache. So you're always going to have people renting, but you're always going to have this headache that's going to give you a crappy return, right? It's going to give you 3-4%, not a whole lot, to have a headache. Rent controls, telling the township that you need to increase your rent every year or so and keeping track of all this. That's just a headache. I might as well just invest in a CD and call it a day. Where it can play is, again, for those big investors where where they're going to buy, let's say, a rent controlled turnkey newer property where they're just trying to move their money over and make a slow growth investment. For the operational, it's very difficult to make money. It's going to be work. So those type of properties I recommend for young people. And I hope that's not ageism, but if I were 30, I would probably invest in Union City because I have 15 good years to work hard and do that operational thing, because doing it at 54, I wouldn't want to do it unless it was an A-type property and I had the money.
Do you see a lot of like crystal ball moment with everything happening in New York? Where do you think things are headed? I know that Mamdani really wants to put even more regulation. Do you think that's going to massively impact real estate?
I have to preface by saying that I'm not political at all, but I always look at things from what you're trying to do. It's from a business perspective. When I talk to these other landlords in New York, I see their operational mentality. I see the hardship they go through every day with dealing with tenants and not paying and this and that and keeping it going. I don't think taking more out of the landlord's pocket is going to help anything. I don't know if regulation really doesn't help, because when it comes to safety and making your properties look good, you have to pay for that. And the only way to get my property safe and looking better is that I have to make money. I can't just pull more money out of my pocket and pay for all these amenities and make it look good. I need to get the money generated from the tenants. So if you regulate me from increasing rents, but yet the standards go so high, I can't afford it, then I just become this middleman that's not making any money, right? I become a charity, and that can't be, because then what's going to happen? They're just like, I have to sell the property off. I can't make any more money. And over-regulation without really knowing the system will hurt the industry for operational type landlords and for the landlord themselves, investors. Yeah.
That's my feeling too. I feel that is where New York is headed, having been here for over 20 years. It's crazy to see just how expensive things have gotten. And of course, like you said, we understand both sides. On the tenant side of things, inflation is through the roof, the cost of living is through the roof, and wages have not gone up as well. But the overregulation, it's also very, very difficult. I have family that owns a lot of real estate in New York. It's tough. It's a really, really tough place to be in.
It really is. And if anybody ever saw what some of the landlords go through with just the nitty gritty, you think we just collect rents, but when you have commercial properties, every year the state comes in, or the town fire inspection. I mean, just the other day they came in. Now, mind you, I had this property for 10, 15 years, never said anything. And they walked into the small closet that I keep the vacuum cleaner in for the cleaning person. And they said, you don't have a sprinkler in this closet. I'm like, I never had a sprinkler in this closet. So I don't know if you know a nice wet system, what they cost, but to tap into a wet system, to put a new line into a small closet that's used to have a vacuum cleaner, because they said that's a new requirement, that's $1,800. That's $2,000 for the guy to come tap into the water, shut down the system. That's a lot of money. Nobody sees that. So what did the typical landlord, I shouldn't say this on television or whatever, but I said, to hell with the closet. I closed it up and put a wall there. It cost me what? Eduardo did it for $200. And because that's insane. So that's the things that landlords deal with, let alone the I'm not paying the rent and I'm going to stay here. That's tough, because there's a lot, like with rent controlled townships, you need to obviously register them. I know we're going on a little tangent with rent control, but I'm discovering this in Newark, because we all thought Newark was such a great place to invest in, but now they have rent control, which means everything needs to be registered. And if it's not registered by law, you probably know this, but by law, I cannot raise the rent on those tenants, nor can I evict them. So can you imagine if you had a property that wasn't rent controlled or registered with the township, you thought you were getting by, then you go either to sell it, or one of your tenants decides to say, screw you, Louis, I'm not paying the rent. Well, you can't evict that tenant until you actually register the unit with the township. So that person can stay there for 5-6 months, not pay anything. Nor can you say, hey, it's the new year, I'm raising the rents for 2026. They're going to say, screw you, Louis, you're not registered, so you can't raise my rent. And technically by law, they can't. So that's an interesting one as well.
Wow. I did not know that. Is that all of Newark?
That's all of Newark now, because apparently they said that a lot of landlords gouged tenants during COVID and increased the rents, skyrocketed, and there was no limitation, especially on owner occupied properties. But now that we're selling a building actually in Newark, a 4-unit, and not registered, what have you, and the new buyer, just give it to the new buyer, but the new buyer would be liable for that as well. So eventually you'll have to register, because if you don't, you're screwing yourself, because you can't raise the rents technically, and you can't evict them if you need to.
Wow. I would imagine also the property value goes down, or the value of that deal if you want.
It has to, right? Because you have to compensate the buyer for that issue. Hey, I'm going to have to deal with this. It's not a turnkey anymore. It's more of a bond with a pain.
A headache.
Right? A bond with pain. So.
Yes, that's going to be my new catchphrase.
Yeah, it was funny because I was studying some things, and I crafted that. I'm like, man, this is like a bond with a headache, and that's interesting.
That's literally what it is. So talk to us about like exit strategy. Since you're selling that property, do you typically buy and hold for a long period of time, or do you like to also have an exit strategy?
I definitely like to have an exit strategy. My stepfather didn't have exit strategies, although he did sell them eventually, but he wasn't thinking of that. He wasn't prepping them to get them up to par for that exit strategy. What happened to a lot of those landlords, some folks can probably relate to this, is that they got to an age and they kind of just let it go. Yeah, just put some paint on, or just do this. And then it started getting decrepit and losing its luster. And so when you try to sell it, of course, like the boomers today are trying to sell it the highest price. It's this much money. It's like, yeah, but the place looks like shit. You can't sell it for so much. So they weren't improving their properties to add value. So that's one thing I would do differently than my stepdad did, is I would keep my properties up to par. So when I'm ready to sell them, I can sell them for the max. As far as holding, I prefer to hold because it's me. Like, I love owning real estate. It's kind of a part of me, and it's my asset. It's like my cash flow, what I do. So it's hard for me to flip, or getting the mentality of flipping, because flipping too has its own challenges. You flip, and now you have 6 months to avoid capital gains to do a 1031 into another property. You got to find a property. And when there's no properties out there and there are no good deals and the interest rates are high, thin pickings. So I like to hold and go through all of the ups and downs, and maybe when I'm 62 or 65, I'll sell and maybe buy a new asset for my daughter, because it's a legacy thing at that point, right? And I don't need to spend and then drive around in the Maserati. I'll probably sell the property, do a 1031 to postpone tax, I should say, and then buy an asset for her and help her manage that so it's under her portfolio. That's my ticket.
I love that. You're kind of training the next generation. Is she interested in real estate?
Not at all. Not at all. She sees me though. Remember, with my stepfather, I just watched him. I did my own thing as a dumb kid. What the hell is he doing? But later on, I learned, and you kind of just develop, that's what he did. Old story is that he had 2 phones in his house. One was 838, which was our home phone, and then 0202. 0202 was the calls for all the rentals. Oh, that's 02. Get 02. Just call. And he teach me to say, it's like, hi, I'm looking for an apartment, or I'm looking for the room. It's like, yeah, call between 9 to 5 tomorrow, and we'll come see it. Or wow, it's $1,200. So I just remember constant calls on the phone. Mind you, we have these today. We have the cell phones, but it would always ring, and it was 0202, and answering the phones constantly, man. It was so funny. So,
did your stomach ever drop when it would ring, or did you like the calls?
Well, sometimes you like the calls because you get some goofy people online. You're kind of looking for the partner, ask them if they have a job or not. But
at like 15, you're asking.
Yeah. But as far as my daughter, no, I don't think she has the interest, but she sees how wealth is. I'm trying to show her how wealth is built and the different avenues of how wealth is built. She wants to become a dentist, which is interesting, which they make money. But what's interesting about dentists, especially some of my friends I know, is they have to work with their hands. Their jobs, it's prestigious, but they're working with their hands. When they're not working with their hands, they're not making any money. So those folks are the ones that have probably too much money they know what to do with, but they're always working. So you'll see them driving around the Land Rovers. They have the nice house. They're going to go flying somewhere, but they don't know what to do with their money. So they was always asking me, hey, what can you do? Can you find me a property, et cetera, et cetera. So for my daughter, I said, look, you can be a dentist, but you're going to own the building as well, and you're going to rent it out. And she said,
both.
Yeah.
because I watched my father also. He has properties, and in the beginning, I never thought that I would own property also, and I just didn't really have that interest. But as I saw what he was doing, and my dad is in construction, my grandfather also was, so I'm third generation, and now my kids are fourth because they're also learning construction and how to do all those things, and they're going to be able to manage our properties, and they know how to even do sheetrock and electrical and all that kind of stuff. So it's great to be able to train. And I love that you were answering the phones because people skills is literally everything. It doesn't matter what industry you go into and whether real estate becomes a full-time thing or not. It's priceless.
That's the truth. That's one thing. I entered into the real estate brokerage arena only 3 years ago. And I watched people and who were good and who were not good. And one would say, who the hell are you? You haven't been in this industry a long time. But I noticed that it's the people who call. It's the people who have conversations and are talking and talking and talking. That's the old way to hustle. And I think the grind really hasn't changed. Again, I've been in medical device sales for 23 years or something like this. And it's always a grind, very lucrative, but a grind. So I see this industry and I said, well, this is the same thing. It's a grind. But I see too much hope on I'm not knocking social media, but the social media, is this going to bring me leads? Is this going to get me a listing? Is this going to get me? And I'm like, no, man, I think that's just a cover. You got to get on the call. So when you listen to people like Bob Knackel and some of these other folks, they're so earthy. You got to get on the phone and call. You have to make calls. And if you're not going to do well, I think. And I think that's the discrepancy I see in this industry. So yeah, definitely calling and communicating and having conversations is a good thing.
Yeah, it's the hand-to-hand combat. It doesn't matter if it's with tenants or, finding a deal. And do you feel like that sets you apart from other brokerages? And I'm curious to find out, since it's been 3 years, like what made you get into it?
I got my real estate license because I thought that I would get more of a visual of the opportunities. That's pretty much why I did. I said, I'll have access to this. I'll know these people and I can find deals. Then I said, well, I don't want to be an agent. I said, I will be a broker. So I found a fast track pathway to get my broker's license because I was in the military. And so I got my broker's license. And then I really liked the partner that I work with. Her name is Garima Verma, and she's a go-getter. She's a salesperson. And so I decided to partner up with her and create LivX. And because she's a grinder, she's a hard worker, and she does very well. And I blended well with that. The only difference is that I don't want to say I'm a little older, but I'm just older where, sales is a grind and I don't want to grind every day for the rest of my life. So I got to a position where I don't have to grind anymore, but I know it's so necessary to be successful in this job. And you can understand that, right? It's hard to grind every day. It's a lot of work. And if you didn't establish your radius or your area, it's hard to start up again. So I pace myself. I do okay, but I'm not grinding like a true agent should grind, but I know how important it is.
Yeah, I'm sure that it's also very, very helpful with finding new deals, as you mentioned. It really gives you a leg up.
It does. You're talking to different brokers, they're finding deals, they have off-market things, and that really helps. Plus, you listen to it. What I love about this industry is that you deal with so many different types of people and different types of trades, and I learn something crazy every day. Not so much on the hands to hands, but even in the finance component, learning how to finance things and creative financing and that sort of thing has lit up some light in my mind of how to buy new opportunities, new assets.
So what do you see for the future in terms of buying new assets in general in the real estate market, but probably more specifically in New York and New Jersey?
I feel that people are getting more knowledgeable. I see more people interested in real estate than I've ever been before. Back in the 80s, it was, get a degree, get a master's degree and work for the corporation, get a corporate job, and that's good. Real estate wasn't even on the map. Only the old landlords, that's what they do, the shitty landlords. But today, I see more people trying to get into investment, buying a single family and renting out the rooms and Airbnb. So many more people are involved in real estate than ever before, which means there's more competition, right? And with more competition, it makes the opportunities to find them less. So with that, I think it's going to be more challenging. It's going to be challenging to find deals because we start going through all of the inventory and eventually, I don't want to say there's nothing left. There's always going to be something for sale, but it's getting more difficult to find the deals. You really got to go hunting for them. I think it's going to become challenging. I think I'm one of the lucky ones to be able to profit very well from my distressed BC property and where I am today versus somebody new trying to jump into one of those properties, let's say in East Orange or something like that, and and try to do well, because there's a lot of competition. People have systems to outpace the other guy. So I think it's going to become challenging. And with the interest rates the way they are, and the divide between salary and what the valuations are of properties, I don't want to misspeak. I thought I read somewhere that like the ratio is like 9 times difference. Like back in the days, it was, you can have a $25,000 job and you can actually buy a house, and that ratio between that was much thinner than it is today. It's such a gap. So I can't imagine me buying an $800,000 house at 7% or 6.5. It's just a lot of money. It's a lot of money, the $6,000, $7,000 a month just for your mortgage. It starts adding up, and God forbid you lose that job. So I guess if I were to give anybody advice, it'd be like, look, don't go for the gold first. Get a multifamily where you can actually ease some of the pain in purchasing those properties instead of going for the big mansion.
Is there any location in New York or New Jersey or in the adjacent states that you can buy something at a good deal at this point?
It's hard to be the crystal ball of good deals. One thing I'm learning is that the good deals are the ones that are not on the market, the ones that are not on Zillow. It's going to be the ones that you're going to hunt for. I would probably give a lot of scrutiny to rent-controlled areas. Be very wary, be very careful of how you manage that, and you have to price it well for rent-controlled areas. And then some of the growing areas, like, there's Garfield's, there's Elizabeth, and those type of places, but I think they're also turning on to rent control areas as well. So, they always say wherever there's a train station, or access to New York, that's always a great place because appreciation is always going to grow in value and people are always going to want to go there. But to turn some money over, I don't know. I still think it can be challenging. I mean, even me, I'm looking every single day and I have cash and I'm ready to go and I just can't find the right one because you're just like, that's not it. It's priced too high. So I have to do more digging. I have to go hunting for those off market and start calling people like, hey, you're looking to sell your property? Well, not now. I'm still holding on to it. Thinking about retiring to Florida. Well, hey, when you're ready to go, let me know. I'm ready to buy. So yeah, it's a hunt.
It's a hunt. It's a tough market at this point, but I think at some point soon it's going to turn around. At least I hope it will.
Well, if you can imagine, if interest rates just took a dump and they went for the better, then yeah, opportunity would open up.
Yeah, but then prices will go up too.
Yeah, the sellers will be like, hey, what up? That's going to go up another 100,000, Yeah, well, but I think some doors will open up. And another thing I think doors will open up for is I feel, and I could be wrong, somebody can call me out on this, I feel there's a lot of boomers and some older generation that are holding on to properties and they're going to have to exit. They're going to have to sell them off, whether it's mortgages that are up for renewal or they're expiring or just boomers that are just getting tired of holding on to the properties. They have to sell. And so I think the market is going to see some more inventory, I'm hoping, so we can have more opportunity for investors. But the smart guy or girl is going to be the one that calls them up before it goes onto the market.
Absolutely. The cold calls. I worked in an office where that's what they were doing. They were just calling people, and that is the way. The hand-to-hand combat is the way to go, especially for our off-market deals. I'm curious what happened with your stepfather's properties.
We have 4 in the family, one in Florida, in Boca, and one in Deerfield. And then we have 2 in North Jersey, and then we sold off a large portion in Pompton Plains, New Jersey. That was his big kahuna, but he owned much more back in the days, and he just sold them gradually. He sold one, and then that's when he bought his house in Boca Raton. That was his retirement. But he was a cash flow guy. He cash in, cash out, cash in, cash out, and he didn't have the large portfolio of stocks and bonds and all that. He was heavy on the real estate.
Incredible that you were witness to all of that. That's amazing. If there was one question that you wish I would have asked you, what would it be?
That's a great question. One question you asked me, I don't think I can think of one. I wish I could, but I enjoy answering questions because I don't know what I don't know. And sometimes I might not even know how to answer the question. And sometimes I'm amazed that I didn't even know the answer to the question, just from stuff I learned, because sometimes I feel like I learn so much, but to regurgitate the information is limited because who am I speaking to, But when the question comes in, I somehow find the answer that I've learned, and
it's in there. It's definitely in there. Amazing. If our audience wants to connect with you, how can they do that?
They can just look up LivX, and it's probably the only company named LivX. And you'll see us, you'll see Garima, and we're happy to assist, whether it's looking at a property and sharing war stories or advice. We can help you out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Clay, for all your insights. What a pleasure speaking with you today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.